The sea smelled like salt and old fuel that morning. I stood on the deck of the FL Guard and let the quiet settle around me before the storm I already knew was coming. My name is Nina, and that yacht, the FL Guard, was mine. Not just owned, built. Every wire, every panel, every line of code in that boat's control system came from my mind. I didn't just run the company behind it. I was the reason it existed at all. For years of designing, testing, arguing with engineers, and starting over when something wasn't right. 4 years of work sitting in that hull. But that morning, I didn't look like any of that. I wore old Navy coveralls, faded, stained from real work done over real years. My hair was tied in a loose bun. No jewelry, no makeup, no watch, nothing that said CEO. That was on purpose. I had learned something a long time ago. People act very differently when they think no one important is watching. They lower their guard. They stop performing. They show you exactly who they are underneath all the polish. I wanted to see who Adrian really was. I had heard enough stories, so I set the stage. I just didn't know how fast he would walk straight into it. I heard him before I saw him. Heavy footsteps on the dock. A loud, bored voice moving through the air like it owned everything it touched. Wow, this place smells like gas. I kept my eyes on the panel in front of me. I was running a system check on my tablet, watching the green lights confirm stability, one by one. I moved slowly, deliberately. I didn't look up. Then his shadow fell across the deck in front of me. He didn't look at my face. His eyes went straight to my coveralls. He scanned me from my boots to my bun, and made a decision about who I was in less than 2 seconds. Then he snapped his fingers. Twice. Hey, cleaner. I almost smiled. He had just walked into a test he didn't even know he was taking. He was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never being told no. He held a phone in one hand and a coffee in the other. He looked at me the same way someone looks at a chair, useful, but not worth thinking about. He grabbed a dirty rag from the railing and threw it at me. It hit my arm and dropped to the deck. I looked at it. Then I looked at him. "Can I help you?" I asked. He smiled like he had already won something. "Start with that rag," he said. He turned away before I finished my sentence. A woman stepped onto the yacht behind him. Tall, blonde, dressed in a cream blazer that looked expensive without trying too hard. She laughed at what Adrian said and nodded at all the right moments. But when his back was turned, her eyes found me. Just for a second, her smile faded. That small thing mattered. I stored it away. I bent down and picked up the rag. I folded it carefully and set it aside. Not because I was told to, but because I wanted to remember that exact moment, the second he decided I was nothing. Then I walked to the main control panel on the lower deck. I tapped a quiet sequence on my tablet, the kind that looked like a routine system check to anyone watching from a distance. The ghost log activated. Every camera on the FL Guard came alive. Every microphone. Every sensor. All of it flowing silently into a secure folder that only I could reach. Then I stepped off the yacht and walked down the dock to my car. I opened my laptop. The live feed from the FL Guard filled the screen. Adrian was already pouring himself a drink from the bar on the main deck. He had spilled some on the counter. He didn't care. "Let's see how far you go," I said quietly. 6 months before that morning, I sat across from a man named Mr. Voss in a glass office overlooking the water. He was nothing like his son. Quiet, measured, sharp in the way that certain kinds of wealth make a person, not loud about it, just consistent. He had built his fortune carefully, and he had learned to read people the same way. He wanted to lease the FL Guard for private events and corporate showcases, high-end investor evenings, the kind of gatherings where the location matters as much as anything said inside it. But there was something else. "I want Adrian managing it," he said. "Something visible. Something that looks impressive." I understood exactly what he meant. He didn't trust his son with real control. He wanted Adrian to have something that looked like power without actually giving him any. We structured the deal very carefully. Adrian would run events on the yacht. He would be the name on the invitations, the face at the front, but ownership stayed with me. Full stop. The control systems, every panel, every function, every log, remained under my access alone. And before we both signed, I added one final thing. A clause, buried in the contract's deeper pages. written in plain language, but surrounded by enough legal structure that you had to be paying close attention to find it. If the operator created any risk, financial, reputational, or safety-related, I could take back full control instantly. No warning needed. Neither of them read that part. Back on the live feed, I watched Adrian move around the main deck like he owned the world. He was giving a small group of investors a tour, walking them through the control room, pointing at panels and systems he had never once touched himself. Then he said it. I designed most of this, actually. I leaned back in my chair. I had expected carelessness. I had expected disrespect. I had expected someone who treated things casually because he had never worked hard for anything. But this was different. He wasn't just careless. He was rewriting history, standing in the middle of something I had poured years of my life into, and telling strangers it came from him. I thought about that for a long moment. Lies are interesting things. They can sound convincing. They can feel solid, but they are built on air. And air is not a foundation. All a lie needs to fall is one clear light shined on it. I made a note on my tablet. Then I kept watching. He moved through the yacht easily, chatting and laughing. He had a natural confidence that was attractive to people who didn't look closely enough. But I was looking closely, and I was patient. Patience, I had learned a long time ago, was its own kind of power. The next morning, I came back to the marina. This time, I wore a clean blazer. My hair was down. I looked like exactly what I was. I wasn't wearing anything that announced my name. But I wasn't hiding either. Adrian was on the deck when I arrived. He glanced up at me. Still no recognition. "Hey," he called out. "Did anyone fix the bar counter? The surface is still scratched." "No," I said calmly. He made a frustrated sound. "Unbelievable. You people never handle things. You people." I nodded once and kept walking. Inside the yacht, I saw what the night had left behind. Wine stains on 2 of the side panels. Papers spread across the navigation table, some of them loose and open in ways they should never be. The bar area looked like it had survived a small storm. I took photos of everything, documented the condition of each area, wrote down timestamps. Evidence always matters more than emotion. That was a lesson I had learned early and never forgot. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. It was the blonde woman from the day before. She stood a few feet away, watching me with careful eyes. Her expression was completely different now. No polite smile, just attention. She held my gaze for a moment without speaking. Then, very quietly, she said, "You're not who he thinks you are." I didn't respond right away. I studied her face. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't performing. She said it the way someone says something they already know is true, with no need for confirmation from anyone else. I turned and kept walking toward the exit. She fell into step beside me. "I've been on this yacht 3 times in the past 2 weeks," she said. "I've watched how he talks about it, what he claims, what he does when he thinks no cameras are running." I didn't react, but I filed that detail carefully. She knew about cameras. I stopped near the doorway and looked at her directly. "What's your name?" I asked. "Vera," she said. "I work in compliance." Compliance. The word settled quietly. "I've been assigned to observe the event program," she added. "Not by him." That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't Adrian's. She was someone further up the chain, someone with their own questions about how this arrangement was being managed. I looked at her for one more moment. "Okay," I said. Then I walked out, but I thought about her all the way back to my car. She wasn't just watching Adrian. She was already watching me too. That night, I sat alone in my office. Every screen I had was on. The live feed from the FL Guard covered 3 of them. A 4th showed the documentation I had been building since day 1. Photos, timestamps, access logs, recordings from the Ghost system. I had a cup of tea I hadn't touched. Adrian's voice came through the speakers. Clearly, he was on the phone, pacing the main deck, talking fast. "I'm going to restructure the whole operation," he said. "Clear out the dead weight, starting with the systems. The current setup is too controlled. I need more flexibility. Dead weight." I picked up my pen. That phrase meant me. My systems. My oversight. He wasn't just enjoying the yacht. He wasn't just being reckless with something that didn't belong to him. He was planning to push me out entirely. He wanted to remove the restrictions built into the contract and take real control. He thought he could do it quietly, through operations, before I even noticed. I set the pen down. This had started as a lesson, a way to see who he was when no one important was watching. But now it was something more. He had turned it into a competition, and he didn't know yet that I had already finished the game. The next morning, I woke up to a message on my secure line. It came from one of the board members, a woman I had known for years, careful, private, not someone who sent unnecessary messages. The message was short. Meeting scheduled for Thursday. He's pushing a vote. I read it twice. Adrian was moving faster than I had expected. I was still thinking through what that meant when a second message arrived. A different sender this time. A man I knew from the early days of the company. 3 words. You should know. They weren't warning me out of panic. There was no urgency in the language, no alarm. They were calm and deliberate, which told me something more important than the messages themselves. They were watching him. For me. I set my phone down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The board had seen enough to be concerned. They were giving me information they didn't have to give. That meant they had already chosen a side, even if no one had said it out loud yet. Adrian thought he was building momentum toward Thursday. He thought the vote would go his way. He had no idea that the room he planned to walk into was already tilted long before he arrived. I picked up my phone and sent one reply to both of them. Noted. Thank you. Vera came to me directly the following afternoon. Not at the marina. At a quiet coffee place 2 streets from the dock. The kind of spot where conversations could happen without attracting attention. She sat across from me and skipped the small talk entirely. You're Nina, she said. It wasn't a question. I didn't confirm or deny it. I waited. I've been observing Adrian for 4 weeks, she said. Assigned by a third party with a direct interest in the event licensing program. She folded her hands on the table. He's worse than the reports suggested. I know, I said. She studied my face for a moment. He's been misrepresenting his authority to external partners, she continued, making verbal commitments without documentation. And last week, he made an access attempt on a restricted section of the yacht's control system. I already knew all of it. The ghost log had caught every detail. Do you want me to step in? Vera asked. I have grounds to flag the whole arrangement. I looked at her steadily. No, I said. She paused. Let him keep going, I said. Don't stop anything yet. She was quiet for a moment. You're building something, she said. Yes, I said simply. And you want him to finish digging before you fill it in. I picked up my cup. Exactly. That night, I went back to work. Not the kind of work people saw. Not meetings or emails or phone calls. The other kind. The kind I had always been best at. I sat in front of my main terminal at the office and opened the Ethelgard's core system architecture. I knew every layer of it because I had written most of it myself. I knew where the gaps were. I knew exactly what could be added without anyone noticing. I started building. It took me most of the night. What I created was a hidden layer sitting just beneath the normal operating system, invisible to anyone who didn't know it was there. Completely inactive unless one specific sequence of events occurred. If Adrian tried to run the launch demonstration under his own login credentials, the credentials he had insisted on having, the ones he thought gave him full access, the layer would trigger. Total shutdown. Engines off. Navigation locked. Control panels dark. All external communications cut. Everything. I ran the test 3 times to be certain. It worked perfectly each time. I gave it a name before I saved it. Dead water. Then I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. The launch event was 5 days away. He was going to make his biggest move in front of every investor, every press contact, and every camera he had invited. And I would be ready. Launch day arrived loud and bright. The marina had been transformed overnight. Banners hung from the dock posts. Hired staff moved quickly along the walkways, carrying trays and arranging branded materials. Camera crews had staked out positions along the water's edge. I arrived early. I wore simple dark clothes. Nothing that stood out. Nothing that would draw an eye in a crowd of people wearing expensive suits and press lanyards. I found a spot on the far side of the dock, partly behind a group of photographers. Close enough to see everything. Far enough that no one would look twice at me. Adrian was already on the deck of the Ethelgard. He was dressed sharply. Hair neat. Posture easy. He moved around the deck with the kind of confidence that cameras love, relaxed but charged, like someone about to do something significant. He shook hands with investors, laughed with journalists. He was performing very well. I watched him work the crowd and thought about the first morning on the deck. The snapped fingers, the thrown rag, the phrase, "you people." He hadn't changed in the time between then and now. He had just upgraded the audience. I put my hand in my jacket pocket. My fingers found the small remote controller. I held it loosely and waited. At 10 minutes past the scheduled start, Adrian stepped to the front of the deck. A small microphone had been clipped to his lapel. He raised one hand and the crowd settled. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "This event represents something I'm very proud of. The Yacht Guard is more than a vessel. It's a statement about where we are going, about what technology looks like when someone actually cares about getting it right." A ripple of polite applause moved through the crowd. He kept going. He talked about innovation, about speed and efficiency. He used words like visionary and next level without any visible discomfort. Then he gestured toward the control room windows. "The systems on this yacht are some of the most advanced in private maritime use," he said. "We built them to be intuitive, responsive, ahead of what the market is currently offering. We built them." I kept my face completely still. He paused for effect. Let the crowd imagine it. Then he smiled, confident and wide, and looked out at the water. "What you are about to see today is the proof," he said. "Not just a boat, a platform." The crowd leaned forward slightly. Every camera was pointing at him. He had no idea the cameras were the least dangerous thing on the dock. The crew prepared the lines. Adrian stayed at the front of the deck, watching the dock crew work with the look of someone overseeing something they had built themselves. He nodded at the crew, like a conductor signaling musicians. The yacht began to move. Slowly at first. The Yacht Guard pulled away from the dock with the smooth, steady confidence of a well-made machine. The hull barely disturbed the water. The engines ran quietly, exactly the way I had designed them to run. Cameras followed the boat as it moved out into open water. I walked to the edge of the dock. The crowd was thick there, everyone pressing slightly forward for the full view. I held the controller in my right hand, down at my side. The yacht reached about 40 meters out. Adrian turned to face the crowd from the deck, one hand resting on the railing, soaking in the moment. The sun was behind him. The water was bright and flat and perfectly still. It was almost a beautiful picture. I felt the weight of the controller in my hand. I thought about the rag hitting my arm. I thought about you people. I thought about dead weight. I kept watching. Timing had always been the part one was best at. Adrian turned toward the main helm controls. He reached forward and wrapped both hands around the throttle. He was going to show speed. That was the climax of the whole presentation, the reason he had invited the cameras, the investors, the press. He looked back at the crowd one final time with a wide, easy grin. "Watch this," he called out. His voice carried clearly across the water. The crowd stirred with anticipation. Cameras adjusted. Lenses focused. Journalists raised their phones. Investors leaned in. Adrian pushed the throttle forward. I pressed the button. There was no dramatic sound. No alarm or bang. Just silence. And then everything that had been running stopped. The engine sound cut. The low hum beneath the yacht that you feel more than hear, the constant vibration of a live machine, vanished completely. The yacht slowed instantly and then drifted. For half a second, nothing happened. The crowd was confused. Some people thought it was part of the demonstration. Some exchanged uncertain smiles with the people beside them. Then the screens on the main deck activated, all of them at once, and they showed one thing: my face. Not video. A still image. A professional photo taken 2 years ago for a company announcement. Below it, in clean letters, Nina, founder and CEO, Yacht Guard Maritime. The gasps came first. A wave of them, moving through the crowd the way surprise always moves, fast and uneven, starting at the front and rolling back through the people who couldn't yet see clearly. Adrian went completely still. His hands were still on the throttle. His smile was still in the shape of a smile, but there was nothing behind it now. He looked at the screens. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the screens again. "What is this?" he said. Low at first, then louder. "What is this?" The speaker system on the yacht activated next. The voice that came through was calm and automated, the kind of system voice I had designed specifically for moments of formal override. Access revoked. A pause. Reason incompetence. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed, a short, startled sound, immediately swallowed. Adrian slammed his hand on the controls. Nothing happened. He tried the navigation panel. Dark. He reached for the communications terminal. Locked. He looked around the deck as if the crew might help him. But the crew had no more access than he did. They stood in place, uncertain and quiet. The yacht drifted on flat water. Helpless. Silent. Beautiful in its stillness. He tried everything. He went from panel to panel, pressing, swiping, entering codes he didn't have. He tried his personal login twice. Rejected both times. The crowd watched in complete silence now. No one was checking their phones. No one was speaking to the person beside them. Every single eye was on that deck. Adrian's composure cracked in pieces. First the smile gone, then the easy posture gone, then the performance itself gone. What was left underneath was something raw and exposed, like a wall stripped of its paint. He pulled out his phone. He dialed quickly. I felt my own phone vibrate in my pocket. I looked at the screen. His name. I let it ring. Then I watched as he pulled the phone from his ear and stared at the screen with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Confusion. Real confusion. The kind that happens when the story you have been telling yourself suddenly stops matching what is happening around you. He looked out from the deck at the crowd on the dock. Scanning. His eyes moved across the journalists, the investors, the hired staff, the camera operators. And then they landed on me, standing at the edge of the dock, holding the small controller in my right hand, looking directly at him. I didn't move toward him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a dramatic gesture. I simply stood where I was and held his gaze. He stared at me from the deck. The distance between us was maybe 30 meters of open water, but the way he looked at me in that moment, I could see every detail of what was moving across his face. Recognition came slowly, then faster. His eyes went to the controller in my hand, then back to my face, then to the screen still showing my photo, then back to me. And in that short sequence of moments, that silent film of understanding, I watched him put it all together. The coveralls, the rag. Can I help you? The system check I had been running when he first arrived. The woman he had dismissed in less than 2 seconds without a second thought. All of it clicking into place at once. I raised the controller slightly, not like a weapon, like a fact. This is what you didn't know, the gesture said. This is what you never thought to check. He opened his mouth, said nothing. The crowd behind me had started to murmur again, low and uncertain. Cameras were still running. Journalists were still capturing every second. He was standing at the center of the biggest moment of his public career. And he had never been more completely alone. A rescue boat came from the marina to bring the Yacht guard back to dock. It took 11 minutes. 11 very long, very public minutes, during which the yacht sat motionless on flat water while cameras recorded and investors checked their watches and journalists made notes on their phones. I watched the whole thing from the edge of the dock. Adrian stood on the deck during those 11 minutes. He tried to look composed. He crossed his arms. He spoke quietly to one of the crew members. He looked at his watch twice, but he never looked away from me for very long. When the boat finally made contact and the tow lines were attached, the murmur in the crowd began to build into something more organized. Questions, not just confusion anymore. Actual questions, spoken out loud, directed at the event staff, at each other, into phone cameras held up to record. Who is that woman on the dock? What happened to the engines? Whose company is this really? I put the controller back in my pocket. Then I walked to the small microphone stand that had been set up on the dock for post-event media questions. I adjusted it to my height, turned toward the crowd. They turned toward me. The crowd took a moment to go quiet. Not because I asked, because something in the way I stood made people pay attention. I had given presentations in boardrooms and conference halls. I had stood on a stage in front of 300 engineers and made a case for something no one had built yet. I knew what it felt like to have a room shift in your direction. This was different. This was open air, water behind me, cameras pointing at my face, about 200 people who had just watched something they didn't fully understand yet. I connected my tablet to the dock's audiovisual system. The 4 large screens that the event staff had arranged for the launch presentation flickered. Then they changed. Not to my photo again. Not to a company logo or a press release. To footage. recorded by the ghost log over the past 9 days, organized by date and time, selected carefully for clarity. Adrian's voice, coming through those speakers on the main deck, in the control room, on his phone, talking about this yacht, this company, these systems, playing now for the very people he had told his version of things to. I waited until the crowd had heard enough. Then I spoke. "My name is Nina," I said. My voice was calm, not loud. The microphone carried it. "I am the founder and chief executive of the company that designed, built, and owns the Ethel Guard." A stillness settled over the crowd, the kind that happens when people are genuinely paying attention and not just being polite. Every control system you have seen demonstrated today was designed by my team. Every safety layer, every operating function. This yacht has never left my oversight because my oversight was built into the yacht itself. I paused for one moment. What you watched on those screens is a record of the past 9 days aboard this vessel. It is unedited. The timestamps are verified. The audio is clear. A few people in the crowd turned to look at each other. The journalists were writing. The cameras had all shifted to face me now. The person who has been presenting himself as the driving force behind this project was given operational access as part of a contractual arrangement. That arrangement included protections. Clear, documented, legally binding protections. I looked at the deck of the Ethel Guard, where Adrian stood watching me. "Those protections were triggered today," I said. "Not by accident. By design." I connected the final file. The screen shifted again. This time the footage was organized differently. Not a timeline of events, but a series of specific moments, edited tightly and played in sequence. Adrian telling investors that he had designed the core systems. Adrian on the phone, saying he planned to remove the dead weight from the operation. Adrian walking journalists through the control room and describing decisions he had never made as though they were his own. Adrian attempting to access the restricted sections of the yacht system, twice, being denied both times without ever knowing the denial had been logged and saved. Each clip was short, no more than 15 or 20 seconds, but together they built a picture that was impossible to misread. The crowd watched without a sound. Some faces showed surprise. Others, the investors who had been in direct conversations with him, the journalists who had quoted his claims in early preview articles, showed something closer to anger. When the final clip ended, I let the silence hold for a moment. I didn't explain. I didn't tell people how to feel about what they had just seen. I didn't need to. The footage had already done that work. Evidence, I had always believed, is most powerful when it is allowed to speak without interruption. "That yacht," I said, "is mine." No one moved. I built it. My team built it. 4 years of work, of engineering, of testing, of starting over when something wasn't good enough. This was not an inherited project. It was not a branding exercise. It was built from the ground up by people who knew exactly what they were doing and why. I paused. I was on this dock 9 days ago in work clothes, running a system check, when the man you just heard on those screens called me a cleaner and threw a rag at me. A quiet sound moved through the crowd. "I let him," I said, "because people always show you exactly who they are when they think it doesn't matter who is watching." I looked toward the water. Adrian was still on the deck. He had not tried to speak. He had not called out. He stood with his arms at his sides and his face very still, like someone who had finally run out of things to say. "Today was not a malfunction," I said clearly. "Today was a test. The yacht performed exactly as designed. Every system responded exactly as programmed." I looked back at the crowd. The only thing that did not perform as expected was the person who thought he was in charge of it. I stepped back from the microphone. By evening, 4 things had happened. The event footage had been picked up by 2 business publications and 1 general news outlet before I had even left the marina. The journalists who were present filed fast. Adrian had not spoken publicly. The board had called an emergency session for the following morning. And at 8:47 that evening, my phone rang. "Mr. Voss." I answered. "You've created quite a situation," he said. His voice was controlled, but underneath it I could hear something working very hard to stay that way. "The situation was already created," I said. "I just made it visible." Silence. Then, after a long moment, I knew he wasn't ready. I knew something like this would happen eventually. I just needed it on record. I let that sit between us. "You used me to get the record," I said. He didn't deny it. "The board will handle Adrian," he said. "I'll make sure of it." "I know," I said, but I had learned something important about Mr. Voss in the months since we first sat across from each other. He was careful and he was smart, but careful and smart people make the same kinds of choices as everyone else when the stakes are high enough. And I had found those choices in the documentation. His choices, not Adrian's, his. By the end of the week, the board had convened twice. Adrian's operational access was terminated on the first day. His contract was ended formally on the third. He didn't contest it. There wasn't much ground left to stand on. On the fifth day, I walked into the second board meeting with the documentation I had assembled over the previous 6 months. It was thorough. It covered decisions that Mr. Voss had made himself, shortcuts approved from the top, risks signed off on that should never have been approved, a quiet pattern of behavior that had shaped everything his son had been allowed to do. He had built the conditions that made Adrian possible. That mattered. The board agreed. By the end of the day, Mr. Voss had stepped down. I didn't celebrate. I rarely do. That evening, I drove back to the marina alone and stepped onto the deck of the Ethel Guard. The dock was quiet. The water was flat and dark and still. I stood at the bow and looked out at the harbor. No coveralls this time. No remote controller. No ghost log running. Just me, standing on something I had built, in the place it had always belonged. I had known from the beginning what this would take. Not anger. Not speed. Just patience, preparation, and the willingness to wait for the moment when someone shows you exactly who they are. They always do.